The morning sun carved shadows across the Texas plains like knife wounds in dry earth. Heat already shimmered off the hard pan, promising another day that would bake the life from anything foolish enough to stand still too long. But Sarah Mitchell wasn't standing still. She was hanging. Her wrists burned where the rope cut deep, arms stretched high above her head, tied to the gnarled mesquite that had become her gallows. Her feet barely touched the ground, toes scraping desperately for purchase on the sun-baked dirt. The settlers had left her there at dawn. Payment for sins she never committed. A message written in flesh and hemp for anyone who might find her. The crude wooden sign nailed above her head told the story in jagged letters painted with what looked like blood. Horse thief pays the price. But Sarah Mitchell had never stolen so much as a biscuit from a neighbor's table. She had stolen something far more dangerous in the eyes of the frontier. She had stolen the heart of a man whose wife didn't want to share. 3 days earlier, she had been teaching school in the settlement of Cedar Ridge. A quiet woman with steady hands and a gentle voice, she had come west seeking nothing more than honest work and a fresh start. What she found instead was Thomas Garrett, a married man whose loneliness ran deeper than the well behind his cabin. Their conversations had been innocent, their friendship careful, but in a place where suspicion grew faster than tumbleweeds, innocent was a luxury no one could afford. Margaret Garrett had watched her husband's eyes linger too long on the schoolmarm's face during Sunday service. She had seen him find excuses to walk past the schoolhouse, heard him mention Sarah's name with a softness he hadn't used for his own wife in years. And when 3 horses went missing from the settlement's makeshift corral, Margaret Garrett knew exactly who to blame. The accusations spread like wildfire through dried grass. No trial, no evidence, just the word of a jealous wife and the hunger of men who had grown tired of losing livestock to raiders. They had come for Sarah before the sun kissed the horizon, dragging her from her small cabin behind the schoolhouse, while she still wore her nightgown and confusion. Now the sun climbed higher, and Sarah's world had narrowed to the burn in her shoulders, the fire in her lungs, and the slow understanding that she was going to die for a crime she never committed. The settlement was 2 miles away, too far for her voice to carry, too far for anyone to hear her struggle. Even if they could, even if they cared, the men who had put her here would not be moved by mercy. Her lips were cracked, her throat raw from calling out through the night. The rope had rubbed her wrist bloody, and every shift of her weight sent fresh waves of agony through her arms. But it was the thirst that would kill her first. The merciless Texas sun that had already begun its work, drawing moisture from her skin like a slow, deliberate torture. She had stopped struggling hours ago, stopped wasting the energy she would need to survive whatever time remained. Instead, she hung there in the growing heat, watching the horizon shimmer and dance, waiting for death to come riding across the plains like a dark horseman. But death, it seemed, had other plans. The sound came first, a whisper of movement through the sagebrush, too deliberate to be wind, too careful to be an animal. Sarah's eyes snapped open, searching the wavering landscape for the source. Her vision blurred with heat and exhaustion, but there, moving like shadow given form, was a figure on horseback. The rider approached slowly, cautiously, reading the scene with the practiced eye of someone who had learned to survive in a land that killed the careless. As he drew closer, Sarah could make out details that made her breath catch in her throat. Dark skin bronzed by sun and wind, black hair that fell past his shoulders, and the unmistakable bearing of a Comanche warrior. He rode a painted horse, its coat marked with symbols that spoke of battles fought and victories won. Across his back, a bow and quiver of arrows. At his side, a knife that had tasted blood and a tomahawk that had split more than firewood. Everything about him spoke of danger, of a people the settlers had taught her to fear above all else. But as he reined in his horse beneath the mesquite tree, as his dark eyes took in the sign and the rope and the woman hanging between earth and sky, Sarah saw something that surprised her. Not the savage hunger she had been told to expect, but curiosity, and perhaps, if she dared to hope, something that might have been compassion. He sat his horse in silence for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the rough edges of a man who had learned English as a second language, but the words came clear and careful. "You steal horses?" Sarah tried to answer, but her voice came out as little more than a croak. She swallowed hard, working moisture into her throat, and tried again. "No," she whispered, "I teach children." The warrior's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. He looked at her hands, soft and uncalloused, then at the sign above her head. He spoke a few words in his own language, sounds that rolled and clicked in ways her tongue could never follow. But the tone carried something that might have been discussed. "White man justice," he said, and spat into the dirt. He dismounted with fluid grace, his movements economical and sure. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as he approached, every story she had ever heard about Comanche cruelty flooding her mind. But instead of reaching for his knife, he pulled a water skin from his belt. "Drink," he commanded, holding it to her lips. The water was warm and tasted of leather, but it was the sweetest thing Sarah had ever known. She drank greedily, desperately, while the warrior held the skin steady. When she had drunk her fill, he stepped back and studied the rope that bound her wrists. "This will hurt," he said simply. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched as he drew his knife, the blade catching the morning light like captured flame. With 2 swift cuts, the rope parted and she collapsed to the ground, her legs too weak to support her weight. The warrior knelt beside her, his hands surprisingly gentle as he examined her wrists. The rope had cut deep, leaving angry red welts that would scar. He reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out a handful of dried leaves, crushing them between his fingers before pressing them against her wounds. "This will help," he said. Sarah stared at him, confusion warring with gratitude. "Why are you helping me?" The warrior was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. "I know what it is to be blamed for what I did not do, to be hunted for the color of my skin, the shape of my face, the blood that runs in my veins." He met her eyes. "We are not so different, you and I." He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight until her legs remembered how to hold her. The world spun for a moment, then steadied. She was alive. Against all odds, against every expectation, she was alive. "What is your name?" she asked. "Running Wolf," he replied. "And you?" "Sarah Mitchell." He nodded, as if filing the information away. "The men who did this, they will come back?" Sarah thought of Margaret Garrett's twisted face, of the hunger in the men's eyes as they had dragged her from her cabin. "They think I'm dead by now. They won't return for days." Running Wolf walked to his horse and pulled a blanket from behind the saddle. He draped it around Sarah's shoulders, covering her torn nightgown. The gesture was simple, practical, but it carried a kindness that made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "You cannot go back to your people," he said. "They will kill you." Sarah knew he was right. Even if she could prove her innocence, even if she could make them see reason, there would always be doubt, always suspicion. Margaret Garrett would see to that. "Where can I go?" she asked. Running Wolf studied her face for a long moment, weighing something she couldn't understand. Finally, he spoke. "My people have a camp 3 days' ride north. You could come with me." Sarah's breath caught. Everything she had been taught, every story she had heard, screamed warnings about trusting a Comanche warrior. But this man had saved her life when her own people had left her to die. He had shown her more kindness in the past hour than she had received from the settlers in months. "Your people," she said carefully, "would they accept me?" Running Wolf's smile was grim. "They would accept you better than your people accepted me when I tried to trade in their town. Better than they accepted you when jealousy poisoned their hearts." He was right, and they both knew it. Sarah looked back toward the settlement, invisible beyond the rolling hills, then at the warrior who had become her unlikely savior. "I don't know your ways," she said. "I will teach you," Running Wolf replied, "as you taught children." The sun climbed higher, and Sarah Mitchell stood at the crossroads of her life. Behind her lay everything she had known, everything she had been taught to believe. Ahead lay the unknown, dangerous and uncertain, but alive with possibility. She looked into Running Wolf's eyes and saw something she hadn't expected. Not the savage she had been taught to fear, but a man who understood what it meant to be cast out, to be judged by the color of his skin and the circumstances of his birth. "If I come with you," she said, "there's no going back." "No," he agreed, "there is not." Sarah pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and took a step toward his horse. The morning sun painted the plains in shades of gold and amber, and somewhere in the distance, a new life waited to be born. Running Wolf lifted Sarah onto his horse with the same careful strength he had shown when cutting her bonds. She settled behind him, her arms trembling as they encircled his waist. The blanket pulled tight against the morning chill that still lingered despite the climbing sun. His body was warm and solid beneath her touch, anchor in a world that had tilted sideways and refused to right itself. The painted horse moved with a smooth gait that spoke of long miles and patient training. Sarah had never ridden bareback before, had never been this close to a man who wasn't her father or brother, had never trusted her life to someone whose language she barely understood. But as they rode north across the endless grass, she found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's movement, into the steady presence of the man who had chosen mercy over indifference. They rode in silence for the first hour. The only sounds the whisper of wind through buffalo grass and the steady drumbeat of hooves on hard earth. Sarah watched the landscape roll past, familiar yet strange from this new perspective. She had seen these plains from the windows of the schoolhouse, had walked portions of them during her evening strolls, but she had never truly looked at them. Now, pressed against Running Wolf's back, she saw the subtle beauty in the endless sky, the way shadows played across the rolling hills, the delicate flowers that bloomed in defiance of the harsh sun. "Tell me about your people," she said finally, her voice barely audible above the wind. Running Wolf was quiet for so long, she thought he hadn't heard her. When he finally spoke, his words came measured and careful. "We are not what your people say we are. We do not kill for pleasure or steal for greed. We take what we need to survive, as all living things do. We protect what is ours, as you would protect your young." He paused, his shoulders shifting slightly. "But we are not angels either. We have done things in war that would make peaceful people weep, just as your people have done things that would make warriors ashamed." Sarah thought of the rope around her wrists, of the hunger in the settlers' eyes as they had dragged her from her cabin. She thought of Margaret Garrett's twisted smile, of the way the men had looked at her torn nightgown before they tied her to the tree. "What will they think of me?" she asked. "They will think what they choose to think," Running Wolf replied. "Some will see only white skin and remember loved ones lost to white man's bullets. Others will see a woman who was cast out by her own people, who knows what it means to be judged without mercy. What they think matters less than what you do." The sun reached its zenith as they crested a low rise, and Sarah gasped at the sight that spread before them. A river cut through the landscape like a silver ribbon, its banks lined with cottonwoods whose leaves rustled in the constant wind. Along the water's edge, she could see the dark shapes of buffalo, their massive heads lowered to drink. Hawks circled overhead, riding the thermals with lazy grace. "Beautiful," she whispered. "This is why we fight," Running Wolf said. "Not for gold or cattle or towns built of wood and nails. For this, for the right to live as we have always lived, to follow the buffalo and the seasons, to raise our children under the open sky." They descended toward the river, and Sarah felt the temperature drop as they entered the shade of the trees. The horse splashed into the shallows, and Running Wolf dismounted, then helped Sarah down. Her legs nearly buckled, stiff from the long ride, but she managed to stay upright. "Rest," he said, gesturing toward a fallen log. "We will water the horse and eat." Sarah sank onto the log gratefully, her body aching in ways she had never experienced. Running Wolf led the horse deeper into the river, speaking to it in his own language, in tones so gentle they might have been lullabies. The animal nickered softly in response, nuzzling his shoulder with obvious affection. From his pack, Running Wolf produced strips of dried meat and a pouch of something that looked like ground berries mixed with fat. He offered both to Sarah, who accepted them with hands that still trembled slightly. "Pemmican," he explained. "It will give you strength." The food was unlike anything Sarah had ever tasted, rich and sustaining in ways that surprised her. As she ate, she watched Running Wolf move through his tasks with the fluid efficiency of someone who had lived his entire life in harmony with the natural world. Every gesture was purposeful, every action considered. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary effort. "How long have you been alone?" she asked. Running Wolf's hands stilled on the horse's neck. 3 summers. My wife died in childbirth, the baby as well." The simple words carried a weight of grief that made Sarah's chest tighten. She had lost her parents to fever, had known the hollow ache of loss, but to lose a wife and child together seemed almost unbearable. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He nodded, his eyes distant. "She was like you, gentle, kind. She saw beauty where others saw only emptiness." He looked at Sarah directly. "Perhaps that is why I stopped when I saw you hanging from that tree. She would have wanted me to help." They finished their meal in companionable silence, the river murmuring past their feet like a conversation in a language older than words. Sarah found herself studying Running Wolf's face, trying to reconcile the man before her with the savage she had been taught to fear. His features were strong and angular, marked by sun and wind and the passage of years, but there was nothing cruel in them. His eyes held pain, yes, but also wisdom and a quiet strength that spoke of someone who had faced darkness and chosen to walk toward light. "What was her name?" Sarah asked. "Your wife." "Morning Star," he replied. "She was born just as the sun touched the horizon. Her mother said she brought light to the world." His voice softened. "She did." Sarah reached out without thinking, her hand covering his where it rested on his knee. The contact was brief, just a moment of shared understanding between two people who had known loss, but it seemed to shift something in the air between them. "She would be proud of what you did today," Sarah said. Running Wolf studied her face for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his dark eyes. Then he stood, extending his hand to help her up. "We should go, the sun grows low, and we have far to travel." As they prepared to mount the horse again, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in the river's surface. The woman staring back at her was almost unrecognizable. Her hair hung in tangles, her face was streaked with dirt and tears, and the torn nightgown beneath the blanket spoke of violence and desperation. But there was something else in her eyes, something that hadn't been there when she had taught school in Cedar Ridge, a kind of fierce determination, a recognition that she had survived something that should have killed her. "I look like a wild thing," she said, half laughing. "You look like someone who has been reborn," Running Wolf replied. "It is not always a gentle process." They rode through the afternoon, following game trails and creek beds, keeping to the low places where they would be less visible to any eyes that might be watching. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled north, the grass growing taller, the trees more frequent. Sarah began to see signs of life that spoke of a different kind of people than the ones she had known. Travel marks in the soft earth, the remains of old campfires, bones arranged in patterns that suggested ceremony rather than mere disposal. "Are we close?" she asked as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. "Tomorrow," Running Wolf replied. "We will camp tonight by the spring ahead. It is a sacred place, protected by old agreements. We will be safe there." The spring he spoke of emerged from a cluster of red rocks, forming a pool so clear Sarah could see every pebble on the bottom. Ancient cottonwoods surrounded it, their massive trunks bearing scars that spoke of countless seasons. The place felt different somehow, charged with a kind of energy that made the hair on Sarah's arms stand up. "What makes it sacred?" she asked, as Running Wolf helped her down from the horse. "My people believe the spirits of our ancestors rest here, that the water carries their wisdom, their blessings." He gestured towards symbols carved into the rock face, weathered by time but still visible. "These marks were made by my grandfather's grandfather. They tell the story of a great hunt, of a time when the buffalo were so numerous they darkened the plains like storm clouds." Sarah studied the carved figures, trying to read the story they told. There were hunters with bows, great beasts with curved horns, symbols that might have been the sun and moon and stars. It was a language written in stone, a history that would survive long after the people who carved it were dust. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Beauty is not always what your people think it is," Running Wolf said. "They see empty land where we see the footprints of the divine. They see savages where we see the children of the earth and sky." As darkness fell, Running Wolf built a small fire using wood from the cottonwoods and sparked it to life with flint and steel. The flames danced against the rock walls, casting shifting shadows that seemed to bring the carved figures to life. Sarah watched, mesmerized, as hunters and buffalo moved in eternal dance across the stone. "Tomorrow," Running Wolf said, settling beside her with his back against a boulder, "you will meet my people. Some will welcome you, others will not. The choice of how you are received will depend partly on them, but mostly on you." Sarah pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "What should I do?" "Be yourself," he replied simply. "Do not try to be what you think they want you to be. They will see through pretense as easily as looking through clear water. Show them the same courage you showed today, the same strength that kept you alive when lesser people would have died." The fire crackled between them, and Sarah found herself thinking about the woman she had been just that morning. The schoolteacher who had lived quietly, who had asked for nothing more than to be left alone to do her work. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone from a half-remembered dream. "I don't know if I have that kind of courage," she said. Running Wolf's smile was gentle in the firelight. "You have already shown it. You trusted me when everything you had been taught told you to fear me. You chose to live when it would have been easier to die. That is courage." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance and listening to the night sounds of the prairie. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound lonely and wild and somehow comforting. Sarah found herself thinking about the future, about the life that waited for her beyond the horizon. It was uncertain, dangerous, completely unlike anything she had ever imagined for herself. But it was hers to choose. And for the first time in her life, that felt like enough. The first light of dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, and Sarah woke to the sound of water lapping against stone. She had slept fitfully, her dreams filled with images of rope and blood and eyes that watched from the darkness. But the nightmares faded as she opened her eyes to find Running Wolf already awake, sitting cross-legged beside the dying embers of their fire. He was preparing something in a small clay pot, grinding herbs with a smooth stone in movements that spoke of ritual and reverence. The scent that rose from his work was earthy and clean, like rain on summer soil. "Medicine," he explained without looking up, "for your wrists." Sarah sat up slowly, her body protesting every movement. The events of the previous day felt like something from another lifetime, but the burning in her wrists and the ache in her shoulders were immediate reminders that it had all been terribly real. Running Wolf approached with the clay pot, his movements careful and respectful. "May I?" Sarah nodded, extending her arms. His fingers were gentle as he unwrapped the crude bandages he had fashioned from strips of his own shirt, revealing the angry red wounds beneath. The rope burns were deep, already showing signs of infection around the edges. "This will sting," he warned, then began applying the herbal paste to her wounds. The medicine burned like fire at first, making Sarah gasp and clench her teeth, but gradually the pain subsided, replaced by a cooling sensation that seemed to draw the heat from her injured flesh. Running Wolf worked in silence, his touch professional and impersonal, but Sarah found herself studying his face in the growing light. There were scars there she hadn't noticed before, a thin white line along his jaw, another that disappeared into his hairline above his left temple. These were the marks of a man who had fought and survived, who had faced violence and emerged, changed but not broken. "You have been a warrior long?" she asked. "Since I was old enough to hold a bow," he replied, not pausing in his work. "But I was other things too: hunter, tracker, keeper of stories. Among my people, a man is not defined by one thing alone." He finished treating her wounds and wrapped them in fresh cloth, this time torn from a clean shirt he produced from his pack. The bandages were neat and secure, the work of someone who had tended battlefield injuries before. "Better?" he asked. Sarah flexed her fingers, testing the range of motion. The pain was still there, but it was manageable now, no longer the constant fire that had consumed her thoughts. "Much better, thank you." Running Wolf nodded and began packing his supplies. "We should leave soon. The sun grows strong, and we have ground to cover before the heat becomes too much." As they prepared to depart, Sarah caught sight of herself in the still water of the spring. The woman looking back at her was still a stranger, but she no longer looked like a victim. The eyes that met hers held determination instead of desperation, strength instead of surrender. "Running Wolf," she said, as he helped her onto the horse. "Yesterday, you said your people would judge me by what I do, not what I am. What did you mean?" He swung up behind her, his body warm and solid against her back. "White people see skin color and think they know everything about a person. My people see actions and judge by those. A coward is a coward regardless of the color of his flesh. A brave person is brave whether they are red or white or black as night." They rode out from the sacred spring as the sun cleared the horizon, painting the grasslands in shades of gold and green. The horse moved with renewed energy, perhaps sensing that they were nearing journey's end. Sarah felt the anticipation building in her chest, a mixture of fear and excitement that made her pulse quicken. "Tell me what to expect," she said. Running Wolf was quiet for a moment, considering his words. "My band is small, perhaps 30 people, maybe 40. We are led by a chief named Grey Eagle, a man who has seen many summers and learned wisdom from each one. He will decide whether you can stay. And if he says no, then we will find another way. There are other bands, other chiefs. Some are more welcoming to outsiders than others." Sarah absorbed this information, trying to imagine what it would be like to stand before a Comanche chief and plead for sanctuary. Everything she had been taught suggested it would be a death sentence, but yesterday had proven that much of what she had been taught was lies built on fear and ignorance. "What about the women?" she asked. "Will they accept me?" Running Wolf's shoulders tensed slightly. "The women will be harder to win over than the men. They have lost husbands, sons, brothers to white man's bullets. They have seen their children taken, their homes burned. You will need to prove yourself to them in ways that have nothing to do with words." "How?" "By showing that you can work, that you can contribute to the tribe's survival, that you are not just another mouth to feed, but hands that can help with the labor of living." Sarah thought about her life in Cedar Ridge, about the skills she possessed. She could read and write, certainly, but those abilities would be of little use in a Comanche camp. She could cook simple meals, mend clothes, tend to minor injuries, but were these enough? "I don't know if I can do what they need," she admitted. "You will learn," Running Wolf said simply, "or you will not survive. The choice is yours." The bluntness of his words should have frightened her, but instead they filled her with a kind of fierce determination. She had survived hanging from a tree in the desert sun. She had trusted a stranger when everything she knew told her to fear him. She had chosen to leave behind everything familiar for the promise of something unknown. She would not fail now. The landscape began to change as they rode deeper into Comanche territory. The grass grew taller, reaching almost to the horse's belly in places. Buffalo trails crisscrossed the ground like ancient highways, worn smooth by countless generations of the great beasts. In the distance, Sarah could see dust clouds that might have been buffalo herds, or might have been something else entirely. "We are close now," Running Wolf said, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been homecoming. They topped a rise, and Sarah gasped at the sight below. A valley spread before them, green and lush, bisected by a meandering stream. Along the banks she could see the distinctive shapes of buffalo hide teepees, perhaps 20 or 30 of them arranged in a rough circle. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and she could make out the movement of people going about their daily tasks. "Your people," she breathed. "Our people," Running Wolf corrected gently, "if you choose to make them so." As they descended into the valley, Sarah began to make out individual figures. Children played along the stream bank, their laughter carrying on the wind. Women worked at various tasks, some scraping hides, others tending fires or preparing food. Men sat in small groups, talking and working on weapons or tools. And then the dogs began to bark. The sound rippled through the camp like a wave, and suddenly all activity stopped. Heads turned toward the approaching riders, hands moved to weapons, children were called to their mothers' sides. Sarah felt her heart hammering against her ribs as dozens of dark eyes fixed on her pale face. "Steady," Running Wolf murmured. "Show no fear. They can smell fear like wolves smell blood." A group of warriors emerged from the camp, moving with the fluid grace of men who had spent their lives in the saddle. They were painted for war, their faces striped with white and red ochre, their hair decorated with feathers and beads. Each carried a lance or bow, and the way they held their weapons suggested they knew how to use them. At their head rode a man who could only be Grey Eagle. His hair was streaked with silver, his face lined with age and wisdom, but his bearing was that of a man in his prime. He wore a magnificent headdress of eagle feathers, and his chest was covered with a breastplate made from bone and beads that caught the morning light. The warriors formed a semicircle around Running Wolf and Sarah, their horses snorting and prancing with nervous energy. Grey Eagle rode forward until he was close enough to study Sarah's face, his dark eyes missing nothing. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of absolute command. The words were in Comanche, rapid and musical, but the tone was clearly interrogative. Running Wolf responded in the same language, his voice respectful but firm. The conversation continued for several minutes, with other warriors occasionally adding their voices to the discussion. Sarah sat perfectly still, acutely aware that her life hung in the balance of words she could not understand. She forced herself to meet Grey Eagle's gaze when he looked at her, to show neither fear nor defiance, but simple honesty. Finally, Grey Eagle raised his hand for silence. When he spoke again, it was in English, heavily accented but perfectly clear. "Running Wolf tells me you were cast out by your own people, that they left you to die for a crime you did not commit." "That's true," Sarah replied, proud that her voice didn't shake. "He says you have shown courage, that you chose to trust him when others would have chosen fear." "I did." Grey Eagle studied her for a long moment. "Courage is good, but courage alone is not enough. Can you work? Can you contribute to the survival of the people?" Sarah thought of her soft hands, her limited skills, her complete ignorance of the ways of the Comanche, but she also thought of the strength that had kept her alive through the long night, the determination that had brought her this far. "I can learn," she said simply. Something that might have been approval flickered in Grey Eagle's eyes. He spoke a few more words in Comanche, then turned his horse and rode back toward the camp. The other warriors followed, but not before. Each had taken a long look at the white woman who had come to them seeking sanctuary. "What did he say?" Sarah asked, as Running Wolf guided their horse toward the camp. "He said you may stay, for now, but you will be watched, judged. If you prove yourself worthy, you will be accepted. If not," he shrugged, "there are many ways to die on the plains." As they rode into the camp, Sarah felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. Some were curious, some hostile, some simply indifferent, but all were evaluating, measuring, deciding what to make of this strange white woman who had arrived with Running Wolf at the dawn of a new day. A group of women had gathered near the largest teepee, their voices low, but their gestures animated. Sarah didn't need to understand their words to know they were discussing her, debating her presence, wondering what her arrival might mean for their people. Running Wolf dismounted near a teepee painted with symbols of wolves and running horses. He helped Sarah down, then began removing his pack and weapons from the horse. The simple actions felt momentous, like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. "This is your home now?" Sarah asked, looking at the painted teppee. "It was," Running Wolf replied. "Now it is ours, if you choose to stay." The words carried implications that made Sarah's cheeks burn. She had not considered what arrangement would be expected of her, what role she would be asked to play. Among the settlers, such things were governed by law and custom, by marriage certificates and church ceremonies. But here, in this place that operated by different rules, what would be expected of her? "I don't understand," she said softly. Running Wolf's eyes were kind but direct. "You are under my protection now. That means you are part of my household, part of my family. The people will expect certain things of such an arrangement."
"What things?"
"That you share my lodge, that you work alongside the other women, that you contribute to the survival of the tribe." He paused, studying her face. "Nothing more will be expected until you choose to give it." Sarah felt a rush of gratitude for his understanding, for the way he had made her safety a priority without demanding payment in return. It was a kindness she had not expected, a respect that went deeper than mere courtesy. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me yet," Running Wolf replied. "The hard part is just beginning."